And he says, well, that's interesting because you are wheezing some and your lungs don't sound completely clear. So I'm going to have you go to a specialist and have your lungs checked with a pulmonologist. Okay, that sounds great. So he's going to go ahead and take care of that referral for me and possibly even get me a doctor's appointment set up for that doctor's. Now, of course, his administrative staff is helping with that process. He's already moved on to the next patient. But the appointment might get scheduled while I'm in the current office, and if not, I'll schedule it myself. So before I get to the doctor's office, I'm expecting them to send this this direct trust message, and I've added the direct trust to this as well as the FHIR images, and the little doctors and nurses have been added as well to help understand how many people are involved in this process and where the breakdown occurs. So direct trust is here. And I would anticipate when I got to the doctor's office, he would have some information for me on file. Once he sees me and diagnoses me, he is going to give me a plan of care, maybe put some information in my patient portal. Some patient information will be provided to let me know more about asthma or bronchitis, whichever I might have, or maybe I just have shortness of breath. And there's some activities I need, maybe I'm out of shape. So he's going to give me that information. Once he has that, he should be sending a message out via direct to my primary care provider to let him know what the diagnosis was and the treatment, so that the primary care provider will get a CCDA via direct. They will also send back a message delivery notification, letting them know that that message was received. And this should be an automatic process. After the message is sent, it should automatically trigger and let the specialist know that message was received. And then my primary care doctor can decide if he needs to make an adjustment to my care plan and let me or my family know that that needs to occur. That's closing the referral loop. Okay, so where are the breakages? Well, the Institute of Health and of Healthcare Improvements estimated that up to 50% of referrals are never completed. So somewhere in this process, it's breaking down. Reason for the incomplete referrals: missing information, misdirected referrals, sent it to the wrong direct address, wrong fax number, not sure there. Faulty communication, maybe the fax wasn't working, or maybe the direct protocol wasn't set up properly in the EHR and they couldn't send the message. So if approximately 70% primary care providers are sending patient history, but get this is sad. Less than 35% of the specialists are receiving patient history. So somewhere this protocol is just totally breaking down, and we need to figure out why. Because 12 million diagnosis errors per year occur in the US, with 20 to 30% are caused by breakdown in referral process. Missed and delayed diagnosis is common cause of medical malpractice in ambulatory care. So if we can fix this referral loop, we're fixing a good bit, and we're providing better patient care. And if FHIR was in here at these levels, there's no interaction from a person. This is an API communicating information back and forth to each other on an open channel. Okay, so what do we need to do for baby steps? We know they're not getting rid of the fax, they're using the fax, they keep using the fax. So how do you incorporate that fax into the workflow? How do you integrate the fax to the EHR system? Well, there's lots of vendors out there doing this. No2 is one we work directly with, and that No2 takes in faxes and they use patient info derived from that fax to support for a patient query to our dynamic FHIR server. They search for the patient. Once they know the patient exists, we let them know the patient ID. That patient is then provided the attachment that came in via the fax in the EHR system, and a lookup can be done in the single sign-on to No2 to understand what information is available for the provider. And this is not just CCDAs. This is all attachments. This could be a PDF. It could be a note from a doctor. It could be a JPEG. It can be an image from a radiology test that was done. So that information is going to be stored for the patient. And once that patient is seen, that a new CCDA is going to be created and sent out via a FHIR document reference to No2 so that no two can share that with the HIE, Commonwealth, Care Quality, and the original place where the CCDA came from or the fax originated from. So this is how we close the referral loop and incorporate the fax and use it for good instead of just throwing it out with the bathwater. Okay, so while we were doing this implementation, we ran into a bit of a snag. It works great with one EHR. You have one FHIR server, one EHR. We're in great shape. But we have hospital systems that we support, and they have our patient portals at 45 different locations, and they might exist across 14 states, and there's also foundation hospitals. So it's really important that we don't recreate the issue with the patient portal having to be in every location when we have a FHIR API. The FHIR API should be part of the health system, and that health system can have one FHIR API, but set up as a multi-tenant environment, and that multi-tenant environment allows information to transfer through that one FHIR server. So let's talk about that for a minute, and I'm going to show you a diagram next. It's for multi-tenant environment, you need to have a tenant ID in the FHIR server endpoint, and it can distinguish the different practices or different tenants. There's an audience parameter, OAuth requested parameter specified by SMART is used during this request. This prevents leaking of genuine bearer tokens to a counterfeit resource server. There's a little note here you can read about EHR launch if needed. Multiple practice environments. In these multiple practice environments, there's two scenarios. One with an endpoint without a tenant ID, and one in an endpoint with a tenant ID. Separate client IDs can be used in the without a tenant endpoint to isolate the practice. Each client ID can be grouped to a specific practice or a practice of its choice. This comes mostly when you have one FHIR endpoint for multiple practice environments. Now there's also the FHIR endpoint with tenant ID, and the tenant ID can be used to identify the targeted practice that the resource needs to fetch it from. So the audience parameter is the OAuth token exchange can be entered with the FHIR endpoint, different FHIR URLs. So something like authentication code flow, smart backend process. Okay, so here's the diagram I promised, and there's a workflow here that you can follow. I don't think I'm going to have enough time to go into it, but please take a minute when you have time, review this slide. Super helpful workflow of how we're doing the smart part of this, the tokens being shared, the identity server, the FHIR server. We also have this master connect EHR server that has the list of providers and practices that are connecting with separate Connect EHR applications that create CCDAs or deliver CCDAs to a database. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the security considerations. Authentication. Users and clients must be authenticated for web-centric OAuth is recommended. Key rotations. Any application or API that validates access tokens must regularly update the set of public keys it uses for signature validation. Communication security. All communication, production, or even staging should occur in a TLS environment, using secure TLS. This includes HTTPS. Audits. FHIR defines provenance and audit event resources suitable for tracking the origin, authorship, history, status, and access of resources. Also, there's labels. Labels are very important. FHIR allows for sets of security-related tags that affect the way resources are handled. Okay, so last year I came to FHIR DevDays and I talked about how everything's disconnected, and that unless ONC steps up and names a standard for these APIs, we're just going to be in another fit with almost similar to doing interface point-to-point. Well, ONC did. They stepped up, they laid down the law, and CMS as well, and they said, in 2015 edition CURES update, you have to use and implement smart technology. You need to upgrade to R4 of FHIR for all apps. Multiple factor authentication needs to happen, which is part of the smart technology. Info blocking is restricted and not allowed, and there will be fines that will occur if this happens. So how do you prevent info blocking? You incorporate US CDI data elements, US core data for interoperability, which replaces the CCDAs. This includes things like clinical notes, provenance, and pediatric vital signs. You also have to make sure that you're able to export electronic health information, EHI. That export needs to be electronic. So you have to be able to get that information out of your system if you're capturing it. Okay, so let's talk about Smart on FHIR, because that's part of the ONC certification requirements, and it's going to help with this big picture. So APIs must utilize Smart and support multi-security launches. Smart App Launch has EHR launch and standalone launch. The standalone launch is what we use with Apple Health Kit and MyLinks, and the EHR launch is being launched from a session within the EHR. There's also Smart Backend services. This profile is intended to be used by developers for backend services, the clients, that autonomously or semi-autonomously need to access resources from FHIR servers that have pre-authorized defined scopes and access. This is mostly server-to-server FHIR connections. The resource requests can be limited to the provided scope. The scope decides the type of resources the service of the app can have access to. Example, system observation.read. So when we were talking about the No2 work, we did this type of backend service authorization, but we did it using shared secrets. We didn't do it just with a public key. Okay, so wrapping up here, I want to show you, I want to go back to the ONC. I'm sure you've seen this several times by now, but this is the ONC information blocking timeline and what needs to be accomplished between now and 2023. Mainly, we're focusing on this item I added here because currently we're going to have to do it this way. We're going to have to piecemeal it, fax machines, FHIR, any way we can to get data out. But come 2022, when everybody is using the APIs and they're enabled, and it's FHIR R4, and they're also using Smart to connect for that security process, we can, at that point, burn the fax machines. Anybody want to sign up with me to go burn some fax machines post 2022? This is when we can say there's no reason for you to be using a fax, as well as for payers. Everybody needs to switch to this API process. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up. I'm going to leave you with this slide. I intend to live forever. So far, so good. And I'm talking about the fax machine there. I don't think that's what Steve Wright was talking about, but food for thought. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining. I look forward to your questions. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Raychelle. Our next presentation is Building Next-Gen FHIR Apps with Shane O'Neill. Shane, take it away. Shane, I'm not hearing any sound. Do you think that you could restart your video and include your computer sound, please?
To build a FHIR app in 10 minutes. Let's get to it. I'm going to start by pulling up a terminal and cloning Asymmetric's FHIR app starter. This is a really nice project because it is written in React and allows you to really leverage all of the features of the JavaScript ecosystem, but still manage to work with the Smart on FHIR protocol and integrate nicely with EHRs. So I'm going to immediately yarn install to start pulling in the dependencies of this project. And I'm also going to move over to our config, which holds our Smart on FHIR information. And I'm going to update this to reflect the app that we're going to be using today. So I just added my client ID, scopes, ISS, and redirect URI. And now I'm going to move over to the source files and into containers. Containers are where most of the meat of this app is, and it's responsible for making requests to the FHIR server and rendering stuff on the screen. So we're going to start with sagas. And sagas are, it's a pattern where you can dispatch what you want to do to Redux Saga, which is a nice library that integrates with Redux, and it will perform your action and give you the results back. So you can see here we're already making requests for patients, and we can do the same for conditions. So I modified this file to also make a call out to condition and supply the patient ID, and we only want the active ones. So I'm going to add clinical status equals active. And then we're going to put this into the Redux store with the type load condition success, home/load condition success. And we're still going to have to reduce that, so let's do this now. So I'm going to move over to reducers now, and I'm going to modify this file to pull what we just dispatched into the Redux store. So we added a new case here called home/load condition success, the same case that we dispatched in our sagas. And we're going to put our conditions into a property called conditions from our payload. And so the next state will have our conditions. And this way our React components can pull our FHIR resources out of the Redux store and render them however they want to. So let's move over to our actual component. So this is a simple component that just says hello, and it's just one row. And we can make this a lot prettier now that we have our conditions loaded into the store to render this out. So let's do that now. So I changed this file quite a bit. We can start with our map state to props function. And this is where we can get our information from our Redux store and pull it into the properties of the component. So we know where our conditions are. We put them in state.home.conditions, and we're going to put them as conditions in our properties. So this way, we can object destructure them out of this.props. And again, these are asynchronous actions. So we want to make sure that we actually have conditions before we start trying to render them. So I'm just going to do a little null check here. If that succeeds, then we can move down to our actual render function, the meat of it, and loop through our conditions. I'm going to choose to filter out some conditions that don't have codings just for the sake of the demo. And then I'm going to map each one to a new row in a table. And I'm going to display their display and their code. So let's start this up and see what it looks like. So what this is doing is it's building our smart information into our launch.html and index.html. In this way, from the perspective of the EHR, it's really simple to register your endpoints, and it looks the same as any other smart on FHIR app. Okay, we can move over to Cerner's Code Sandbox, which is what I'm going to use to test this, and open up a patient. Log in. Here's what the starter app looks like. We can see that it's loading right now. And we can see after some time that the conditions were properly requested and displayed on the screen. Cool, so that's about it for me. If you need any more information on what just happened, then definitely check out a blog post on Asymmetric's website that goes through all of this in more detail. The FHIR App Starter is open sourced and available for all of you to use. And follow up with us at FHIR@asymmetric.com. Thanks a lot.
And Shane, did you have any closing comments?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, that was a lot of fun putting that demo together. A lot happened in a very short amount of time writing that code. So if you're confused, definitely reach out to FHIR@asymmetric.com, that blog post, check out our GitHub, clone it, make some great apps. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Shane. Just to let our attendees know, you can post questions during the presentation in the Q&A box, but questions will also be available to view after the session has ended. So please go ahead and put any Q&A that you have in the Whova app. Our next presenters are discussing how to extend clinical workflows using Smart on FHIR with Dharmesh Patel and Kalyan Parmarth. Dharmesh?
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi, my name is Dharmesh Patel. I'm a solution consultant in Google Cloud Healthcare and Life Sciences organization. And in my current role, I build and enable Google Cloud-based solutions for our healthcare customers, providers, and health plans. And with me today, I have Kalyan Parmarth, who is a product manager on Google Cloud Healthcare API and focuses on Smart on FHIR. With that introduction, thank you very much for spending your time today, 15 minutes of your valuable time today. So today I'm going to talk about how to extend the existing clinical workflows using Smart on FHIR. I'm going to specifically talk about three things. One is the patient-generated data in clinical workflow. So what is patient-generated data? Why is it important? And what are the challenges associated to using patient-generated or reported data in the clinical workflow today? How can we solve those problems? We will go over a recommended smart on FHIR based architecture. And then finally, we will demo a case study to showcase how potentially we can implement this solution. So what is patient-generated data and why is it important? Patient-generated data could be the data that you get from, it's reported, self-reported by patients. These are the data that are measures which are generated from the PROMIS systems, right? And it could be the data collected from the patients via questionnaires, surveys, and stuff like that. It could also be the data that are being collected via personal health devices and the monitoring devices like blood glucose monitoring device, blood pressure, and the fitness devices, the sleep monitoring devices, and so on. So why is this important, right? Now, the self-reported data provides a lot of information about patient's lifestyle, the context in which patient lives today, the current situation, and some of the measures which are created by using the patient-reported outcomes, those could be used potentially for triage, for diagnosis of the conditions at the point of care. So, and also, I mean, the health, wellness data and the fitness data that we collect could also give us more information about the patient, which gives us 360-degree view of the patient. If that is made available to the clinicians at the point of the care, it's going to significantly help in making the decision on patient's care. So it is important. Then what are the challenges? Why don't we use it today? So if you look at today's situation, if I take my example, even today, my physician asked me to keep a log of my blood pressure monitoring, log from my blood pressure monitoring device or blood glucose monitoring device, write it on a piece of paper or print it and take it with him and then give it to him, which data never goes to my electronic medical record system. It stays on the paper, probably goes into the paper chart, and that's not used beyond that particular encounter or that particular office visit. So how could we make this happen, right? And I mean, our electronic medical records are, we all know it's stored today and managed in electronic medical record systems. If we have ability to write it back to electronic medical record system, it would potentially be great, but then there are some technical challenges with that. Those technical challenges includes challenges associated with integration. EHR vary in terms of their liabilities or their abilities to write back data. There could be issues with data formats and the way you can represent this data into the clinical systems or the existing EMR systems. There could be, we lose the context of the care. So even though this data is very useful, when we want to associate it with the encounter that is currently being in progress, how do you associate it into the context for the given patient? So those are some of the challenges that we have. And so what we have is a solution that we propose, which is based on smart on FHIR apps and a secondary FHIR server. And this diagram is depicting an opinionated view of how this could potentially be solved. This is not the only solution, but this is a solution. So we are talking about two types of smart apps here for two different audience, patients and clinicians. Typically, the clinician's app is launched from the electronic medical record system so that the context of what is the encounter, who's the patient can be passed from the EMR system to the Smart on FHIR app, as well as the patient app, which is launched from the patient portal provided by EMR again. And the collection of the PGD is the responsibility of the smart app. It collects either that patient-generated data directly from the patient or from a platform like Fitbit platform, where the data is stored by those devices, or a device aggregator platform where you can pull the data in, and then you can store that data instead of writing it back to EMR. And in this diagram in the left corner, you can see the EMR has a primary FHIR server, which is a possibility that we could write there, but for whatsoever reason, let's say we cannot, and we don't, and the physicians don't want it as part of the electronic medical record, then you can write it into the secondary FHIR server. Now, once you write it to the secondary FHIR server with the support for FHIR referencing and all of that, your data is still cohesive, it's very well integrated, and then it is accessible from the clinician-facing apps directly. So I think this is our proposed architecture. What I'll do is in the next, I'll go over the key concepts of the architecture, where we've introduced a secondary FHIR server, which is potentially a cloud-hosted FHIR server. You can easily and quickly spin it up. And then there is a patient-facing smart app, which is a smart compliant app, so that it is more portable across the health systems. A clinician-facing app, which is also more portable. So if you have a situation where you are running multiple EHRs, then as long as the EHR supports smart specifications, you can deploy those apps across different EHR systems. And then we're talking about the integration surface is where the clinical data and the PGD data is displayed is through the Smart on FHIR apps. With that, I'll go into the case study and the demo. The case study here, what we took is for this particular demo was we took a questionnaire workflow, and this is slightly different than the questionnaire implementation guide that you see on the FHIR hl7.org FHIR website. So what we've done is we have looked at the questionnaire workflow, and typically when you see the questionnaire workflow, let's look at the outpatient setting or the doctor's office visit setting. A patient goes to the office, gets a questionnaire in form of a paper or something, or an iPad. They complete that questionnaire, and that information goes into some system where the questionnaire is there, and then doctor looks at that questionnaire and does something with it, which I don't know what he does. So in this situation, what we are showing is the patient will be able to complete the questionnaire using a Smart on FHIR app, will store that questionnaire data in the secondary FHIR server, and then a clinician will be able to pull that information and then look at it in the context of the EHR, because the questionnaire Smart on FHIR app is launched from the EHR. And potentially what you can do with this architecture is you could take the secondary data that you've collected, or the data that you collected from patients into the secondary FHIR server. You can potentially take that, use it for further research. You can de-identify that data, and in Google Cloud, we have a de-identification support in FHIR server. We have a secondary FHIR server as well. And then you can take that data and then export it to BigQuery or a data warehouse or a data analytics system, where you can use it for machine learning and for a lot of other use cases. So with that, I will demo the Smart on FHIR apps, and then I will open up for questions. So what I'm showing is the left side of this picture, where the Smart on FHIR app is basically, I don't have the EHR with me, but I can use the Smart App Launcher as the EHR that I will use to launch my app, and my app launch URL is here. And I am using this for the patient portal launch, and this one for the provider. Let me share my screen. I think my other screen is not visible. So, and this one, I hope it is visible. So this is where the Smart App Launcher, which acts as an EHR for me, which I'm launching, which I've configured to launch as a provider EHR launch. I'm using the R4 version of the FHIR server. I have selected a patient from the patient browser, which is already provided by Smart Health IT Launcher. And then I'm selecting a physician from the list. And then I'm launching my app. Okay. Okay, I think this is having a problem. Apparently, I think I'll have to make the configuration change, but let me go to the patient portal launch, and hopefully this will not have that issue, or maybe I'm using a wrong URL for this. Yeah, I think there's a change, and because of that, I'll probably not be able to demo this as I think the client ID has changed. So I think, but what I was going to show was the questionnaire app. Once it is launched, the clinician can select a questionnaire, can submit that questionnaire. Can you see my screen?
I see the smart app launcher.
Okay. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now? So I think
Yes, we see the slideshow.
thank you. So I think the app that I was going to demo, which didn't work, was supposed to display the questionnaire to the clinicians, and then clinician selects a questionnaire, assigns it to a given patient, and when he assigns that question to the patient, a procedure request resource is created into the FHIR server and sends a notification to the patient that there is a questionnaire that is available. Then patient opens up the patient side of the app and then reads the questionnaire, read the procedure request resource, and then it selects it and completes the questionnaire, submits it, and which is returned as a questionnaire response resource back into the FHIR server, which is then made available to the clinician through the questionnaire screen. So the status of the questionnaire going from assigned to in progress to completed is all managed within the secondary FHIR server as the attributes of the questionnaire resource and the procedure request resource. And the resource, the procedure request resource and the questionnaire resource, questionnaire response resource are linking back to the patient resource, which is not in the secondary FHIR server. That resource lives in the primary FHIR servers. So with that, unfortunately, I was not able to demo because of the changes at the last stage, but with that, I will open up for questions.
Thank you, Dharmesh. There are a few questions already in the session Q&A. Looks like they're already receiving some answers, and the session Q&A will remain available after this session has ended, so you can check back there for answers to your questions. In the meantime, we do have a final keynote session that's about to start. I thank you all for attending, and thank you for a wonderful DevDays.